The rhythmic thrum of the diesel engine was the only constant companion I allowed myself these days, a dull, insistent heartbeat against the vast, indifferent expanse of the sea. Salt spray, cold and sharp, kissed my face, a fleeting sting that mirrored the deeper aches within. My hands, once precise in their measurements of crime scenes, now moved with practiced, weary efficiency, coiling thick rope, hauling nets heavy with the ocean's bounty. This was my penance, my solitude, the fishing boat 12 miles offshore transfer point. Here, the world's clamor was muted, reduced to the squall of gulls and the groan of the hull. The sun, a pale disk above the eastern horizon, promised a new day, but its light felt thin, unable to penetrate the shadows I carried. I was Cole, or what was left of him. Cole, I seen this. The voice, rough and weathered like the planks beneath our feet, belonged to the captain. He held out a battered phone, its screen a tiny window into the world I had abandoned. I wiped my hands on my worn canvas trousers, the scent of fish and brine clinging to my skin, and took the device. The image on the screen was a still photo, grainy but clear enough to make the air catch in my throat. A bank vault, or rather, what had been a bank vault. The steel door, usually an impregnable barrier, lay on the polished marble floor, not blown or pried, but removed. It looked as if it had simply been unbolted from its frame, a surgeon's clean excision. The caption beneath the image spoke of a daring, bloodless heist. A fortune in bearer bonds vanished without a trace, no alarms triggered, no witnesses, no struggle, a ghost of a robbery. My fingers tightened around the phone. The captain, oblivious to the internal earthquake I was experiencing, grunted, "Crazy, ain't it?" Like they just walked in and asked for it. No one heard a thing, they say. Cleaner than a whistle. Cleaner than a whistle. The phrase echoed, grating against the walls of my memory. The lack of forced entry, the silent execution, the specific target, high value, untraceable assets. Where was this? I asked, my voice a rasp I barely recognized. The captain squinted at the screen. Some place called the Sterling Depository downtown, happened last night. Just broke on the news feeds. Sterling Depository, not a typical commercial bank, but a private vault for the city's elite, shielded by layers of security protocols that should have made such an operation impossible. But impossible was a word I had learned to distrust. My gaze drifted from the screen to the distant, hazy outline of the city on the horizon. From this vantage point, it looked almost peaceful, a collection of distant spires against the morning sky. But I knew the rot beneath the gleaming facades. They say the police are stumped, Captain continued, taking back his phone. Called it an act of unprecedented sophistication. No leads, no suspects. He shrugged, turning back to his nets. Just another day in the city, I guess, nothing for us out here. But it was something for me, something that clawed its way out of the depths, bringing with it the scent of old blood and the bitter taste of regret. The unprecedented sophistication was a lie, or at least a misdirection. I had seen it before. Not heists, but disappearances. Men and women, all with specific, seemingly random connections to obscure financial dealings, vanishing without a trace. No struggle, no witnesses, no alarms. The killer had been nicknamed the Architect by the press for the terrifying precision of his work. And I, Cole, had been the lead detective, the one who had come so close, only to watch him slip away, leaving behind a trail of grief and a career in ruins. This wasn't just a heist. The way the vault door had been removed, not forced but disassembled, spoke of an intimate knowledge of the structure, an almost surgical approach. The target, untraceable bonds, suggesting a mind focused on the value of anonymity rather than mere cash. The complete absence of any trace. It was the Architect's calling card resurrected, but why now? And why a heist, not a disappearance? A familiar, frantic drumbeat began against my ribs. I could feel the ghost of that old case pressing in, a weight that had never truly lifted. I had replayed every detail, every misstep, every dead end 1,000 times in the lonely hours before dawn. The cryptic notes, the impossible timelines, the way he seemed to melt into the city's concrete veins. I had been deemed obsessed, reckless, ultimately a failure. I look like I've seen a ghost, Cole. The captain observed, his voice cutting through my internal storm. Perhaps I had, or perhaps the ghost had simply decided to re-enter the living world. The thought was a bitter draught, but beneath the bitterness, a flicker of something else ignited. A spark, a forgotten purpose. I had failed once. The architect had beaten me, but this felt different. This was a challenge, a taunt thrown across the years. He was not just stealing money, he was stealing my peace, dragging me back into the labyrinth of his design. And this time I wouldn't be caught unprepared. The sea could wait. My penance could wait. The city was calling and I had a score to settle. The city's pulse, usually a frantic drumbeat against my window, felt muted, a distant throb I no longer cared to join. Yet the images from the newsreel flickering across the stale air of my small apartment clawed at me. The sleek, impossible breaches, the whispers of unprecedented sophistication. Lies, or, at the very least, a deliberate blindness. I had seen this artistry before, this chilling precision that spoke not of mere greed, but of something far more sinister. The ghost of a past failure, a name I dared not utter, began to stir in the dust-choked corners of my mind. My hands, once steady instruments of law, now trembled with a phantom tremor. I traced the outline of a faded photograph on my desk, a younger me, eyes bright with an idealism long since eroded. The weight of what I knew, what I felt, was a physical burden, a leaden cloak wrapped around my shoulders. To walk away, to let the official narrative prevail, felt like a betrayal not just of the victims, but of the very core of who I once was, and who, perhaps, I still desperately yearned to be. No, I whispered to the empty room, the word a rasp against my dry throat. The sound was barely audible, yet it resonated with a fierce, quiet resolve. I had to listen. I had to see. My first move was less an investigation and more an act of desperation, a blind lunge into the murky depths I knew best. I needed information, the kind that didn't flow through official channels, the kind whispered in shadows and exchanged for favors that never truly evaporated. I knew a man, a grizzled contact, who still owed me a lifetime's worth of quiet gratitude. He wouldn't be easy, but he was my only anchor in this treacherous sea. The journey was long, a slow dissolve from city lights to the inky blackness of the open water. 2 hours out, under a sky choked with indifferent stars, we rendezvoused. Its deck was slick with brine and fish guts, the air thick with the scent of salt and decay. This was where the city's secrets, too heavy for land, were often offloaded. The grizzled contact, his face a roadmap of hard living and harder choices, emerged from the cabin, a cigarette glowing like a malevolent eye between his fingers. He was a man carved from sea-weathered wood, his gaze as sharp and unforgiving as a harpoon. He didn't offer a greeting, merely a curt nod, his eyes sweeping over me, assessing the years of wear and tear. "Cole," he rumbled, his voice like stones tumbling in a barrel. "Heard you were out of the game. Some games never end." I countered. "Tell me about the recent acquisitions, the ones the news calls unprecedented." He spat a stream of brown tobacco juice over the side. "Official story, always an official story." He gestured to a rusted metal drum indicating I should sit. They hit the high-end jewelers, the tech vault, the art gallery. Clean, surgical, no witnesses, no alarms tripped until hours later. Ghost work. And the targets, anything common beyond the value. He narrowed his eyes, studying me. "You always looked for the wrong things, Cole. Everyone else sees the diamonds, the data, the masterpieces. You see the gaps, the spaces in between. The gaps speak volumes," I insisted. "The official reports mention the high-value items. What else?" The contact exhaled a plume of smoke, a thoughtful cloud. "They took the safe deposit boxes, the main vault contents. From the tech vault, the server racks. From the gallery, the impressionist collection." He paused, then added almost as an afterthought, "And from the gallery, a small ceramic bird, a cheap, mass-produced thing. Smashed it on the floor, left the pieces scattered near the main entrance. No value, just," my breath hitched. "A ceramic bird, smashed." My mind flashed back, not to the official case files, but to a hidden detail, a scrap of evidence the other detectives had dismissed as mere vandalism, a random act of spite. Years ago, in the aftermath of the first victim, a similar, seemingly insignificant item had been found. A chipped porcelain doll, its head deliberately crushed beneath a heavy boot, left at the foot of the bed. It had been dismissed as a trivial detail, a sign of sloppy work, but I had seen it as a signature, a message. A ceramic bird, I repeated, the words tasting like ash. Are I sure? Saw the crime scene photos myself, the contact grunted. The cleanup crew almost missed it, just thought it was a clumsy thief, but it was in every photo, a tiny, broken bird. He squinted at me. Why? A ghost's calling card. This wasn't just a series of heists. This was him. He hadn't just returned. He had announced it subtly for me alone to decipher. The unprecedented sophistication was a magnificent smokescreen, drawing attention to the glitter and away from the grit, the broken pieces on the floor that only I would recognize. A shiver, not from the biting sea wind, traced its way down my spine. This wasn't just about solving a case. It was about confronting the specter of my greatest failure. He was playing a game, and I, a disgraced and broken man, was being drawn back onto the board. But the ceramic bird, it was too specific, too mundane, too perfectly him. The contact watched me, his expression unreadable. I got that look, Cole, the one that says I rest seeing things no one else does. That's what got I in trouble last time. And it's what might save us this time, I muttered, my gaze fixed on the churning black water. My personal stake had just been carved into stone. The game had truly begun. The salty air, thick with the promise of rain, bit at my exposed skin. Below me the ocean churned, a restless beast mirroring the tempest brewing within my chest. The game had begun, I told myself, but the rules were still being written in shadow and blood, and I was merely a pawn, though one with a very personal score to settle. I stood on the deck of the fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point, the engine a low thrum beneath my worn boots. It was a vessel built for hauling nets in silence, not for rendezvous with ghosts. A single bulb, caged in wire, cast a weak, amber glow across the scarred planks. The lone occupant, a weathered old salt whose face was a map of sun-creased lines, merely grunted when I boarded, offering no questions, seeking no answers. His eyes, the color of deep sea, held a silent understanding of men like me, drawn to the edges of the map. A desperate hope, a long shot, but I was beyond cautious bets. I needed to feel the threads of this new pattern to trace their weave back to the loom. Every minute stretched, taut as a fishing line under strain. Then, a flicker on the small, static-laced screen inside the cabin caught my eye. The old salt, hunched over a steaming mug, didn't look up, but his gaze was fixed there. 2. A news bulletin breaking through the usual late-night drone. My gut clenched. The anchorwoman, her voice tight with artificial urgency, spoke of a daring mid-ocean interception. A convoy, transporting a priceless collection of ancient artifacts from a private collector to a mainland museum, had been compromised. Not just compromised, but utterly dismantled. The lead vessel, a reinforced transport ship, was found adrift, its crew incapacitated, its cargo hold empty. The accompanying security cutters had been outmaneuvered, their communications jammed. It was a ballet of precision and brute force, far more audacious than the previous 2 strikes. This wasn't just about money, it was about demonstrating absolute control, a mastery over chaos. My breath hitched. Mid-ocean. A transfer. The echoes of my past, sharp as shards of glass, began to prickle. This wasn't just a copycat anymore. This was a direct challenge, a theatrical reenactment of a horror I thought I had buried. The previous heists had been mere rehearsals. This was the opening night. They found this. The screen cut to a grainy image, clearly from a security camera on the recovered vessel. A single small object nestled on a control panel. It was a length of rope tied into an intricate, almost artistic knot. A specific knot. One I had seen before countless times, in my nightmares and in the evidence photos that still burned behind my eyelids. The hangman's rose, they had called it, a macabre signature left by him at every scene, a twisted flower of finality. This was the reveal/discovery. My vision blurred, not from the boat's gentle sway, but from the sudden, overwhelming certainty. It wasn't just mirroring, it was him. A student, perhaps, or an acolyte. My former colleague, the one who had always dismissed my theories, had always called the knot an insignificant detail, a random flourish. He was wrong, I was right. And that truth was a bitter, sickening draft. A sudden, sharp ping from the satellite phone I carried, a device meant for discreet communication, startled me. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. "Cole, Ira, a hard man to find." The voice was clipped, authoritative, and laced with an undercurrent of barely concealed frustration. It was the new lead detective, a woman with eyes like chipped ice and a reputation for relentless pursuit. "We have a situation, a big one, and my name keeps coming up in the periphery." My name? I kept my voice level, though my heart hammered against my ribs. "I'm retired detective, just fishing." A scoff. Funny that, because the details of this maritime phantom operation, they bear a striking resemblance to the methods of the sea-bound serpent killer I so famously failed to catch years ago, and guess what? My old case files, the ones everyone else dismissed as the ravings of a broken man, they are suddenly looking rather prescient. "Pre-what?" I asked, feigning ignorance, though a grim satisfaction mingled with the rising panic. They were finally seeing it, but at what cost? Prescient, Cole, as in I understood the signature. The knot. And now, the fishing boat 12 miles offshore transfer point is being flagged by port authority for unusual activity. My name popped up on a passenger manifest, a last-minute addition. Coincidence, Cole? Or are I once again chasing ghosts without telling anyone? My fingers tightened around the phone. She hadn't revealed how she knew about the boat, but her words were a net tightening around me. My presence here, which I had thought was a step ahead, was now a potential liability. Official attention, unwelcome and sharp, had found me. "I'm merely observing, detective," I said, choosing my words with care. "Trying to make sense of something that feels familiar. Familiar enough to be on a boat 12 miles offshore when a major federal incident goes down. An incident that screams of my past failure." His voice hardened, losing all pretense of civility. "Don't play games, Cole. The feds are involved now, and they have a very long memory regarding my unorthodox methods. They're going to want to talk to I immediately." The line went dead. "Best decide if you're riding it out or sailing into it." I looked out at the churning black water, the distant lights of the mainland a mocking twinkle. The stakes had indeed risen. The third heist, grander and more terrifying, had not only confirmed my worst fears, but had also painted a target squarely on my back. I was no longer just chasing a ghost. I was being hunted by the living, by the very system I had once served. The game had truly begun, but I was no longer sure who was holding the pieces. The wind, a jagged blade, flayed the skin from my bones as I stood on the deck of the fishing boat 12 miles offshore transfer point. The vessel, a battered workhorse of the waves, groaned beneath my feet, its ancient timbers sighing with every swell. Overhead, a thin crescent moon wrestled with bruised clouds, casting a fitful, silvery sheen upon the black, heaving expanse. The distant mainland was nothing more than a faint shimmer, a reminder of the world I'd left behind, the world I was now being dragged back into, cloaked in oilskins and shadow, emerged from the cramped cabin below, the scent of stale brine and diesel clinging to him like a second skin. His face, when he finally turned towards the decklight, was a roadmap of deep lines and weathered skin, his eyes dark chips of obsidian holding a knowing weariness. This was not a friendly reunion. "You're late," I rasped, my voice hoarse against the wind's howl. The spray from a breaking wave slapped against the hull, a percussive punctuation to my words. The broker merely grunted, pulling a laminated chart from inside his jacket. His finger, thick and callous, traced a series of marks. "Information costs, Cole, and this information, it's heavier than gold." I pulled a thick envelope from my own pocket, the crisp edges of the currency inside a stark contrast to the damp, salty air. He took it without a glance, tucking it away with practiced ease. His gaze, however, lingered on my face, searching, assessing. I met it with a hardened resolve, allowing no flicker of the ghosts that danced in my periphery. "The targets," I prompted, cutting through the unspoken tension. "What connects them?" He unfolded another, smaller piece of paper, its edges softened from repeated handling. "The first, the Romanov emeralds. Not just the stones, mind you, but the entire display case, crafted from gilded cypress wood, commissioned by Catherine the Great herself. Stolen from the van der Linde collection, private vault, discreetly located beneath the city's oldest opera house." My mind immediately began to sketch the scene. The precision, the lack of forced entry, the vanishing act. 3 panels depicting the fall of Byzantium, painted by a reclusive master, lost for centuries, only recently rediscovered. Taken from the secure gallery of the Alastair Foundation, a fortress masquerading as an art house. I felt a familiar prickle of unease. Not just valuable, but historically significant. Items with stories, with provenance. This wasn't just about the market value of the gems or the canvases. "And the third," I pressed, "the one that brought me to my barnacle-ridden doorstep." The broker's eyes held mine. The Codex Umbra, a collection of illuminated manuscripts dating back to the 12th century, thought to contain obscure astronomical charts and forgotten alchemical formulas, stolen from the underground archives of the Blackwood Library. Their security, Cole, was legendary, impenetrable. The wind picked up, whipping my hair across my face. I tasted salt and metal. This wasn't random. This wasn't simply a smash-and-grab crew seeking quick profit. There was an intellectual thread, a narrative woven through these targets. A collection was being built not of wealth but of history, of forbidden knowledge, of lost art. "A pattern," I murmured, more to myself than to him. "Not just value, not just rarity, significance, historical weight." The broker nodded slowly. "Precisely. And the common thread beyond their historical cachet is their provenance. Each item before its recent public display or rediscovery spent decades, even centuries, in private, undisclosed collections, hidden from public view, only recently brought to light. That detail, like a sliver of glass, snagged something deep within me. Hidden, undisclosed. The serial killer I'd pursued, the one who'd slipped through my grasp, had a fascination with secrets, with hidden truths, with things unearthed and then reburied. He had left behind not bodies, esoteric connections. The broker narrowed his eyes, a flicker of surprise in their depths. The Romanov emeralds were rumored to be part of a set of 7, each representing a celestial body used in a forgotten pagan ritual, and the shattered mirror triptych. Legend says its true purpose was not art but a coded map to a forgotten city, or perhaps a prophecy of its own making. My breath hitched. Celestial bodies, prophecies, rituals. The blood in my veins seemed to slow, thickening to sludge. This wasn't just a resemblance. It was an echo, a spectral hand reaching out from the grave of my past. The killer, I remembered, had left behind cryptic messages, often referencing ancient texts or astrological alignments. A ritual. The broker watched me, his expression unreadable. Perhaps, or perhaps it's simply a collector with a very specific, very expensive taste. But I knew better. The meticulous planning, the surgical precision, the symbolic weight of the targets, it all screamed of the ghost I had failed to lay to rest. The old case had revolved around a series of disappearances, each victim connected to a unique collection of rare books or artifacts, only for those items to vanish with them. Back then, I'd thought it was about the objects, but now, a terrifying new possibility unfurled itself. What if it was never just about the items? What if it was about what they represented? A jolt ran through the deck as the boat hit a particularly large wave, the words tasting like ash. I think I'm seeing his reflection. The memory of the last victim's empty study, a single, arcane symbol scrawled on the wall where a priceless astrolabe once hung, burned in my mind. The symbol was identical to one I'd glimpsed in a faded photograph of the Codex Umbra, now stolen. The broker's next words, though quiet, were sharp as glass. "There's talk, Cole, that these collectors are seeking something specific, not just pieces but the key to something. And they believe I, of all people, might know where to find it. That's why the target on my back isn't just painted, it's glowing. My muscles tensed, a primal instinct to fight or flee surging through me. They knew about me. They knew about my past. The heists weren't just mirroring the old killer, they were bait, a macabre invitation. I was no longer just chasing a ghost. I was being hunted by one, and it knew my name. The churning black water around the fishing boat 12 miles offshore transfer point suddenly felt less like a transfer point and more like a trap. The air, heavy with the phantom scent of old blood and salt, pressed down on me like a shroud. They knew. That chilling certainty had settled deep in my bones, a cold parasite. The heists weren't just a macabre echo. They were a deliberate call, an invitation delivered with a killer's twisted smile. I was no longer merely chasing a shadow. I was caught in its gaze, a quarry on the precipice. A crumpled, unsigned note found tucked beneath the windshield wiper of my battered sedan had led me here. 3 words scrawled in a hasty, almost familiar hand. The foreman, tonight, transfer. The foreman. My mind snagged on the name. Not the foreman, but a foreman. The one from the docks. The man with eyes that saw too much and a mouth that spoke too little. A witness from the old case whose testimony had been as slippery as wet seaweed. He'd vanished shortly after, a wisp of smoke in the wind. Now a ghost returned. The journey out was a symphony of churning water and a diesel engine's guttural groan. The small craft, a sturdy workhorse, bucked and dipped, each lurch a reminder of the vast, indifferent ocean stretching out around us. 12 miles offshore felt like 100, the city lights a distant, smudged memory. It sat low in the water, its single mast a skeletal finger pointing at a sky bruised purple and gray. No lights, save for a dim, intermittent glow from within its cabin, a silent predator waiting. The charter pilot cut the engine, letting us drift, his gaze flicking nervously between me and the other vessel. I pressed another wad of bills into his hand. "Wait here. Don't move until I signal." He nodded, his eyes wide, a silent promise of obedience. The deck was slick with spray and the faint, metallic tang of fish. The air here was thicker, charged with an unspoken tension. I pushed open the cabin door, its hinges groaning like an old man's knees. Inside, the foreman sat hunched over a cluttered table, illuminated by a single, bare bulb swinging precariously from the ceiling. His face, etched with a decade of hardship, looked older, gaunter than I remembered. His eyes, though, still held that familiar flicker of cunning and fear after all these years. He took a long swig from the bottle, his gaze darting to the cabin door, then back to me. "They found me, the new ones, they are the connection. You think that monster worked alone, Cole. All those years you chased a ghost, you only saw half the picture." My breath hitched. "What are you talking about?" The old wounds, barely scabbed over, tore open anew. The picture. The phrase clawed at my gut, a sickening realization. All those sleepless nights, the endless files, the faces of the victims, had I missed something fundamental? The brains, they said, the planner, the one who truly understood, the artistry. He shivered, pulling his threadbare jacket tighter. They called him the architect, never left a trace. The monster I caught, the architect. It wasn't just mimicry, it was a continuation, a master plan unfolding. And the heists, the calculated precision, the lack of forensic evidence, it all clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. The original killer, the one I'd pursued relentlessly, was indeed a brutal force, but these new acts, they bore a different, more meticulous signature. "Finish you," said I, a loose end, a memory that needs erasing. His eyes, wide with a desperate plea, fixed on mine. They told me to tell I that the game has only just begun. Before I could press him further, a sudden, violent lurch rocked the boat. A heavy thud from the deck above, followed by the splintering crack of wood. The cabin door, which I had left ajar, was suddenly kicked inward with brutal force, tearing free from its hinges, tall and broad, silhouetted against the dim light from the deck, filled the doorway. I couldn't make out features, only a menacing bulk, an aura of quiet, lethal intent. I reacted on instinct, shoving the table toward the intruder, sending bottles and papers clattering to the floor. The foreman, screaming, made a dash for a small hatch in the corner of the cabin. I lunged, aiming for the torso, but a heavy fist connected with my jaw, sending a blinding flash of pain through my skull. My head snapped back, stars exploding behind my eyes, and I stumbled, colliding with the bulkhead. Before I could recover, the figure was on the foreman. His eyes, wide and unseeing, stared blankly at the swinging bulb, just like that. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was an execution. They had used the foreman as bait, a disposable pawn to lure me into a trap, to deliver their message, and then to be eliminated. I lunged again, fueled by fury, but the figure moved with an unsettling speed. A hand, surprisingly strong, grabbed my arm, twisting it behind my back with brutal efficiency. I cried out, feeling a sharp pop in my shoulder. My head was slammed against the wall, then again and again, a rhythmic, concussive assault. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard a low, guttural voice, devoid of inflection, close to my ear. I should have stayed buried, Cole. The architect always finishes his work. A final, crushing blow to the back of my head, and the world dissolved into a swirling vortex of black and pain. The boat pitched, the waves outside a mocking lullaby. The thrum of the engine vibrated through the planks beneath me, a relentless pulse against the dull throb in my skull. A stench of stale diesel and brine clung to the air, thick and cloying, a suffocating blanket. My eyes fluttered open, the low light of a single bare bulb swinging precariously overhead, painting the small cabin in sickly yellow hues. I was splayed on the grimy floorboards, my wrists bound tightly behind my back, ankles lashed together with coarse rope. The rocking motion of the fishing boat 12 miles offshore transfer point was a cruel lullaby, threatening to heave the contents of my stomach onto the already stained deck. The foreman, his vacant eyes a final, horrifying image. He was gone now, his body presumably tossed overboard like so much unwanted catch. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a familiar chill I hadn't felt since the first of the old cases. I tested my bonds, the rope biting into my skin, unyielding. My head pounded, a drum solo of pain, but clarity began to seep through the haze. This wasn't just a mugging or a random act of violence. This was orchestrated. The precision, the quiet efficiency, it had the telltale signature. A shadow fell over me. I strained my neck, my muscles protesting, to see a figure standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the slightly brighter light of the boat's main cabin. It was one of the men who had been with the foreman, the silent, watchful one. He carried a coiled length of rope, thicker than what bound me, and a large canvas duffel bag. His face was obscured by the low angle of the light, but I felt his gaze, a predatory weight. "Awake, are we?" His voice was a low rasp like gravel dragged across concrete. No malice, no triumph, just a flat, professional tone that chilled me more than any snarl. He stepped further in, and I could finally make out his features. A lean face, sharp angles, eyes that held no warmth. He knelt not beside me but a few feet away and began to untie the duffel bag. A glint of metal caught my eye, tools, not fishing gear, surgical steel polished to a mirror sheen. My stomach lurched. This wasn't about the diamonds. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Just a messenger. The architect prefers to remain unseen for now. He pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound journal from the bag, its pages yellowed with age. He didn't open it, he just held it, turning it over in his hand. "This belonged to a friend of yours, didn't it? A colleague." My mind raced, scrambling through faces, names, memories. A colleague, the journal. My eyes fixed on the cover, a familiar emblem, barely visible now, etched into the leather. It was the crest of the old academy, the one we all received upon graduation. But the journal itself, it wasn't mine. It wasn't anyone I knew currently. What are I talking about? I rasped, trying to buy time, to force my sluggish brain to connect the dots. He looked up then, his gaze piercing. "Let's talk about the patterns, Cole, the meticulous planning, the brutal efficiency, the way certain elements are left behind. I saw them at the jeweler's, didn't I? The same signature, the one I missed all those years ago." The words hit me like a physical blow, the old case, the serial killer, my failure, my gut twisted. But that killer was dead, or so I believed. My conviction, the one I had built my career around, had crumbled. Could it be a copycat, or worse, someone else entirely using the ghost's methods to taunt me? He's been watching Cole. The man continued, his voice softer now, almost conversational, yet laced with a subtle menace. Watching I unravel. Watching I try to put the pieces back together only to find them scattered again. He enjoys the game. Who is he? I demanded, pushing against my restraints again, a futile effort. And why me? He finally opened the journal, not to read but to show me a faded photograph tucked into the front cover. It was a group shot taken years ago at the academy. A dozen eager, fresh-faced recruits, myself among them, standing awkwardly in our crisp uniforms. And then my eyes landed on him. A young man standing slightly apart from the others, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk on his face. He was in the background, easily overlooked but undeniably there. The face wasn't the man kneeling before me, it was another. A ghost from my past, one I had dismissed as inconsequential. A man who had dropped out of the academy shortly after that photo, vanished without a trace. A man I had barely remembered until this very moment. His name, a whisper in the dusty corners of my memory, now screamed through my mind. He felt overlooked. The man explained, his eyes still on the photograph. Forgotten. While Cole, I was always the golden boy, the one destined for greatness, the one who solved cases even if I sometimes missed the bigger picture. The bigger picture, my past case, the one that destroyed me, the killer I'd hunted, the one I believed I'd stopped but I hadn't. The true architect had been hiding in plain sight, pulling strings, using another as a proxy. And now, he was back using the old methods but with a new target, me. This wasn't just about diamonds or revenge for a past slight. This was personal. This was a meticulously crafted humiliation designed to dismantle me piece by piece, just as my reputation had been dismantled. The truth. He closed the journal with a soft thud. And then he wants you to break. He stood, moving towards a heavy steel hatch in the floor. My eyes widened. The true nature of the threat coalesced, a terrifying clarity. This wasn't just a transfer point. It was a staging ground. The tools, the journal, the veiled threats. It was all a prelude. The fishing boat 12 miles offshore transfer point wasn't just a boat. It was the entry point to something far more sinister, a place where the architect of my downfall intended to finish his work. And he was finally ready to step into the light. The hatch coughed open, a groan of stressed metal, and a rush of stale, briny air spilled into the chamber. Beneath it, no deep pit, no abyss, but a narrow, descending ladder crafted from iron. It plunged into gloom, leading not to a cavern, but to the rhythmic slap of water against a hull. My breath caught, a cold knot tightening in my gut. The ladder ended on a slick concrete ledge, barely wide enough for my boots. Before me, nestled in a hidden grotto carved into the bedrock, bobbed the very vessel I'd been hunting, a weather-beaten trawler, its hull scarred by countless voyages. This was the fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point brought to ground, moored in a secret harbor beneath the city's oblivious hum. The interior of the boat was a stark contrast to its weathered exterior. The main cabin, though small, was meticulously clean, stripped bare of personal effects. Yet it wasn't empty. On a small, bolted-down table, bathed in the dim glow filtering from a single bulb, lay a collection of items arranged with deliberate precision. My gaze locked onto them, a terrible recognition dawning. There was a faded photograph, its edges softened by time and handling, showing a younger me, grinning awkwardly beside a robust figure with a booming laugh, the former partner. Next to it, glinting dully, was a small, hand-carved fishing lure, painted with intricate scales and tiny, iridescent eyes. It was a unique piece, fashioned by the former partner himself, a gift from his father carried always for luck. A tremor ran through me. No one else knew about that lure. No one. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a declaration. My past failures, my deepest regrets, were being dredged from the murky depths. Beneath the lure, a folded piece of paper lay waiting. My fingers, surprisingly steady, unfolded it. The message was brief, scrawled in the same elegant, unsettling hand I now knew too well, The tide rises, Cole, will you drown again? And below a single precise address followed by a time, 2200. My eyes darted to the address. It was the old boathouse, a place the former partner frequented for solitude, a quiet spot on the outskirts of the city where he kept his own small vessel. This wasn't a game of chess. It was a direct assault, a cruel twist of the knife. The former partner, the man who had stood by me through my downfall, was now a pawn in this monstrous design. I looked around the cabin, my mind racing, desperately searching for anything else, any clue, any sign of struggle or preparation. The journal, the perpetrator's insidious ledger, was nowhere in sight. But on the table, a small digital timer, its red digits counting down, pulsed silently beside the photograph. 01:17:32. Just over an hour until 22:00. Had I misread the signs? Had I been so consumed by the echoes of the past that I'd walked straight into a trap, leading this monster directly to those I cared for? The meticulous planning, the deliberate misdirection, the way they seemed to anticipate my every move, it was almost as if they were inside my head. Was this entire elaborate hunt just a prelude to this moment, a way to isolate me, to corner me, to force my hand? But the image of the former partner, his boisterous laugh echoing in my memory, shattered the paralysis of doubt. This wasn't about my failures anymore. It was about saving a life now inextricably linked to my own haunted past. The perpetrator wanted to see me break, to witness my despair. But they had miscalculated. They had poked at a wound, yes, but they had also ignited a furious resolve. I grabbed the photograph, the lure, the address. The timer continued its relentless march. The fishing boat 12 miles offshore transfer point was not a place of escape for the perpetrator, but a stage for their cruelest act yet. I had to move and move fast. The cold dread that had enveloped me at the sight of the boathouse address did not dissipate. Instead, it sharpened into a blade of ice in my gut. This wasn't a clumsy error, a misplaced clue. It was a taunt, a deliberate redirection. The perpetrator wasn't just mimicking the old killer's methodology. They were performing for me. They knew about the former partner, knew about his quiet retreat, knew how a message tied to him would snag my attention. The boathouse wasn't the target. It was merely bait, a carefully placed decoy in a larger, more intricate game. My hands, usually steady, trembled as I crumpled the address into a tight ball. The realization hit me like a rogue wave. The killer wasn't merely replaying a tragedy. They were writing a sequel, and I was cast as the lead. Every move, every stolen item, every meticulously etched symbol, it was all designed to echo my past failure, to dredge up the ghost of the case that had shattered my career and my peace. I closed my eyes, forcing my mind to sift through the fragments of information, to find the true signal amidst the noise. The previous heists, each a twisted mirror of the original string of terror, had a rhythm, a cadence. But there was a subtle dissonance, a slight tremor in the otherwise perfect replication. The old killer had always chosen targets of symbolic significance, places of quiet opulence, not necessarily for the value of the items, but for the story they told. This new perpetrator, however, seemed to value the performance more than the narrative. The objects taken were valuable, yes, but the manner of their acquisition, the precision, the defiance that was the true prize. The boathouse, then, was an act of misdirection. While I was focused on the familiar, the perpetrator would be moving towards the truly audacious. What would be the grand gesture? What would truly complete their macabre opera? I remembered a conversation with a weary colleague weeks ago about a high-profile collection being moved, a private exhibition of antique navigation instruments, destined for an offshore vault. It was a whisper in the wind, dismissed as too complex, too exposed for any rational thief. But this wasn't about rationality. It was about spectacle, about proving a point. The collection included a rare, historical sextant, once owned by a notorious privateer, a perfect symbol of calculated risk and mastery over the unknown. And the transfer point for this collection, the final leg of its journey, had been mentioned. This was it. Not the boathouse, but the sea itself. My plan began to coalesce, sharp and unforgiving. If the perpetrator was playing a game of chess, I would exploit their predictable ambition. I would not chase the decoy. I would intercept the end game. A series of hushed calls followed, each word chosen with surgical precision. Then, a quick, coded exchange with a contact who still worked the docks, a grizzled old-timer with eyes that saw more than they let on. I needed a vessel, fast and discreet, capable of navigating the open water without drawing undue attention. "Where you headed, Cole?" The old-timer's voice crackled through the phone, thick with suspicion. "Out to sea," I answered, my gaze fixed on the nautical chart spread across my kitchen table. "Transfer point." A silence stretched, heavy with unspoken questions. "That's a long way for a quiet night, son." "It won't be quiet," I murmured, more to myself than to him. "Not tonight." I didn't tell him the whole truth. I couldn't. The fewer moving parts, the less chance for the perpetrator's meticulous network to detect my countermove. I arranged for a subtle manipulation of the usual patrol schedules, a phantom distress call to draw attention away from the true prize. I even left a breadcrumb, a carefully worded, anonymous tip about a potential break-in at a small, coastal gallery, just enough to keep the official channels distracted, looking in the wrong direction, just as the boathouse had done for me. Was I merely walking into another trap, one more elaborate than the last? The killer had always been one step ahead, a ghost I could never quite grasp. My failure years ago still gnawed at me, a constant reminder of my own limitations. What if this was all a grander illusion, designed not just to taunt, but to ensnare me completely? What if the perpetrator had anticipated my anticipation, turning my desperate logic against me? A dull ache throbbed behind my eyes. I remembered the odd choice of a specific non-valuable antique compass left at the scene of the first new heist. It had seemed out of place among the other meticulously chosen items, almost an afterthought. A compass points north, but it can also lead astray if its needle is tampered with. The thought pricked at me, a tiny barb of unease, but I pushed it down. There was no time for second-guessing now. The die was cast. By the time the old-timer's vessel, a squat, sturdy workhorse named the Wanderer, cut through the harbor's slick black waters, the city lights were already receding into a hazy glow. I stood at the bow, the spray stinging my face, watching the horizon swallow the last vestiges of civilization. My eyes scanned the Inkai expanse, searching for any sign, any anomaly. The moon, a sliver of silver, cast a weak, ethereal light, painting the waves in shades of gray and black. It grew steadily, resolving into the unmistakable form of a fishing trawler, its lights a beacon of sorts in the emptiness. The fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point, the climax. I gripped the railing, the cold metal biting into my palms. The trap was set. Now I would see if I was the hunter or merely the most desperate prey. The engine of the small cutter thrummed a low, insistent pulse against my ribs, a counterpoint to the wild beat in my own chest. The sea, a vast, indifferent canvas of obsidian, stretched before us, reflecting the scattered pinpricks of distant stars, 12 miles offshore. The coordinates etched themselves into my mind, each number a shard of ice. The phantom distress call I'd engineered had done its work, pulling the net wide, leaving this sliver of ocean exposed, vulnerable. It was a gamble, a desperate throw of the dice, but the alternative was a slow, suffocating defeat. The young helmsman, his face a shadow under the navigation lights, cut the engine. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the slosh of water against the hull. "He's dead ahead, Cole," he murmured, pointing to a faint, bobbing silhouette. "Fishing boat 12 miles offshore, transfer point." I gripped the worn canvas of my duffel bag, the weight of the old service pistol within a cold comfort. My breath plumed in the frigid air. The smell of salt and diesel filled my nostrils, a familiar scent from a life I thought I'd left behind. A rope ladder dangled from the fishing boat's stern, swaying with the gentle swell. Too easy. That thought, a persistent burr, pricked at the edges of my resolve. Nothing about this man's operations had ever been easy. "Wait for my signal," I told the helmsman, my voice a gravelly whisper. He nodded, his eyes wide with an unspoken understanding. I scaled the ladder, each rung a step deeper into the dark waters of my past. The deck was slick with brine, the air heavy with the scent of fish and something else, something metallic, sharp. I moved with the practiced stealth of a predator, muscles taut, senses extended. The cabin door stood ajar, a sliver of amber light spilling onto the deck. I pushed the door open, the creak echoing in the sudden quiet. My breath hitched. Not a stranger, but a ghost. A figure from the periphery of my old life. A face I'd dismissed, overlooked. The colleague. He turned, a slow, deliberate movement, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You always did have a knack for the dramatic entrance." My hand instinctively went to the pistol grip, but I didn't draw, not yet. The shock was a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity, the inside knowledge, the precise timing, the seemingly random targets that, in hindsight, formed a twisted narrative only someone intimately familiar with the old case files could have woven. The subtle ways he'd nudged me, planted ideas, observed my frantic scramble. He'd been the puppeteer all along. "It was you," I managed, the words tasting like ash. "All of it, the heists, the patterns, you copied him." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Copied, my dear Cole, I perfected him. He was an amateur, a crude sculptor. I, on the other hand, am an artist, and I was always so focused on the obvious, weren't you? So quick to dismiss the quiet ones." He gestured around the small cabin, a sweep of his hand encompassing the crates. "The final transfer, a significant haul, wouldn't you say? Enough to disappear and build a new empire far from the reach of your broken justice system." The crates, not fish, not even stolen goods in the conventional sense. I saw the glint of polished metal, the subtle curve of something ancient. Artifacts, priceless, irreplaceable, not just money then, something more profound, more symbolic. The realization hit me like a rogue wave. This wasn't just about profit, it was about legacy, about proving a point. My point, the point I'd missed all those years ago. Why? I demanded, the question tearing through my throat. Why mimic him? Why drag up that nightmare? His smile widened, devoid of warmth. "Because you left it unfinished, Cole. You let him slip away and then you let yourself become undone. I merely picked up the thread. I saw the beauty in his chaos, the potential in his method. And I saw how easily it could be turned against the very system that created us, then discarded us." His gaze bore into mine, accusing, challenging. "You thought you were better than him. You thought you were smarter. He was right in a way. My failure had consumed me, left me vulnerable, but his words were meant to break me, to chip away at my resolve. I wouldn't let him. I read not just mimicking him, I countered, my voice regaining its steel. I read trying to be him, to finish what he started, but he was a monster and so are I." His eyes narrowed, the last vestiges of his placid demeanor dissolving. "A monster or a necessary evil? Look around, Cole. The world is built on lies, on corruption. I merely expose its fragility, its inherent weaknesses." It flashed in the lantern light, a wicked arc. But he was faster, stronger, fueled by a conviction I hadn't fully grasped. The sudden gloom was disorienting, the fishing boat's gentle sway becoming a violent lurch. My shot went wide, burying itself in a wooden beam. I heard the scrape of his boots, the ragged rasp of his breath. He knew this boat, knew its every creak and groan. He was at home here in this shifting, watery world. A sharp, metallic clang. He'd thrown the wrench. It ricocheted off the bulkhead beside my head, sending splinters flying. I dove, rolling behind a stack of crates, the smell of ancient fish guts thick in the air. I read a relic, a broken man clinging to a shattered badge. His words found their mark, a stinging truth that threatened to unravel me. I was slower. My joints ached, my breath came in ragged gasps. But the fire, the righteous anger, still burned. I wouldn't let him win. Not now. Not after all I'd lost, all I'd fought to reclaim. I heard the distinct click of a safety disengaging. He had a weapon. He hadn't just copied the killer's methods, he'd embodied his ruthlessness. This was never going to be a clean arrest. This was a reckoning. The shot cracked, loud and concussive in the confined space. A grunt. A stumble. Had I hit him? Or had I simply grazed the edge of his carefully constructed facade? The boat lurched violently, caught in a sudden rogue wave, throwing me against the bulkhead. The pistol flew from my grasp, skittering across the slick deck. I was disarmed, vulnerable, and he knew it. The distinct click that echoed across the steel deck of the fishing boat 12 miles offshore transfer point was not the sound of a safety being disengaged, nor the hammer of a pistol drawing back. It was far more insidious. It was the soft, almost apologetic cough of a timer completing its countdown. A sudden lurch, a violent tremor, seized the vessel. I staggered, my bad knee screaming in protest, clutching at a rusted railing as the deck beneath me tilted sharply. The stranger, who moments before had been a silhouette of smug confidence, was caught off guard too, his balance momentarily lost. But he recovered faster, his youth a cruel advantage. "Clever, Cole," he sneered, a glint of amusement in his eyes as he righted himself. "Always looking for the grand gesture, but you always miss the quiet details." The air filled with a high-pitched whine growing louder, more urgent. It was the sound of stressed hydraulics or perhaps a failing engine. My gaze snapped to the stern where a small, inflatable dinghy previously secured now swung precariously, its tether slackening with each violent heave of the boat. The stranger had planned his escape and the vessel was his sacrificial lamb. "You're going to scuttle it," I stated, the words tasting like ash. The heists, the meticulous planning, the echoes of the past, all of it now coalescing into a horrifying tableau of calculated destruction. The pattern, the signature, was not just about the theft. It was about the obliteration of evidence, the theatrical vanishing act. "A final flourish, wouldn't you say?" he replied, his voice barely audible above the rising shriek. He pulled a small, waterproof bag from inside his jacket, a glint of metal visible within. "Master's final lesson. Leave nothing but a ghost." The master. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just an imitation, it was a continuation. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments, the subtle deviations from the original killer's methods, the increased precision, the technological upgrades. The original had been a brute, an artist of chaos. This man was a technician, a student who had surpassed his teacher. "You learned from him," I accused, my voice raw. "You finished his work." He smiled, a chilling, triumphant baring of teeth. "I perfected it. He showed me the way, the art of the invisible hand. You only saw the bloody canvas, never the brushstrokes. You were so busy chasing phantoms, Cole, you never saw the student in the shadows taking notes." My breath hitched. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The original killer had been caught, yes, but not by me. He died in prison, a heart attack, years after his capture. But the method, the philosophy of his heists had lived on. This man, this stranger, was his successor. Not a copycat, but an inheritor. He hadn't just mirrored the past. He had evolved it, refined it, making the heists more elusive, more daring. And all to prove a point, to complete the legacy, and perhaps to mock the man who had failed to see the danger lurking in the periphery all those years ago. The boat lurched again, more violently this time, and a geyser of brackish water erupted from a ruptured pipe near the stern. The deck was slick, treacherous. The stranger moved with a dancer's grace, making his way towards the dinghy. "It's over, Cole," he called out, his voice tinged with finality. "You're too old, too slow. This is where your story ends, drifting with the wreckage." He swung himself into the dinghy, fumbling with the small, outboard motor. My joints screamed, but the fire inside me, the righteous anger that had been rekindled, burned brighter than ever. I wouldn't let him escape, not now. I pushed off the railing, ignoring the searing pain in my knee, and launched myself across the heaving deck. The distance was greater than I'd anticipated, the pitch of the boat more severe. "Pathetic," the stranger spat, a triumphant laugh escaping his lips as the outboard motor sputtered to life. He kicked at my grasping fingers, his boot connecting with my knuckles. A sharp jolt of pain shot up my arm, but I held on, my grip like iron. He pulled a small, gleaming knife from his belt, its blade catching the dim light. "Time to let go, old man." He lunged, aiming for my hand. I twisted, using the momentum of the boat's list, and pulled myself higher onto the edge of the dinghy. The unexpected shift in weight threw him off balance. The knife clattered harmlessly onto the boat's deck as he stumbled, his head colliding with the dinghy's gunwale. He grunted, disoriented, shaking his head. I seized the opportunity, my good hand finding the small, waterproof bag he'd placed beside him. It was heavier than I expected. Inside, I felt the unmistakable shapes of solid-state drives, small dents packed with data. The evidence, the proof. "No," he roared, lunging for the bag. I pulled it free, rolling away from him, my back hitting the dinghy's side. The boat was listing sharply now, water pouring onto the deck. The fishing boat 12 miles offshore transfer point was sinking. He scrambled, desperate, reaching for the motor, but I was faster. With a surge of adrenaline I didn't know I still possessed, I kicked at the outboard motor, sending it spinning uselessly into the water with a splash. His eyes, wide with disbelief and rage, locked on mine. "You fool! You've doomed us both!" The dinghy, no longer propelled, drifted aimlessly, tethered precariously to the dying behemoth. I held the bag close, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My body ached, every muscle screaming, but a strange calm settled over me. "No," I rasped, looking him dead in the eye, the truth finally undeniably revealed. "I just stopped you." The fishing boat groaned, a final, tortured cry before its stern dipped beneath the waves, dragging the dinghy with it. The cold, dark water rose around us, but I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I had found the ghost, and I had finally, truly fought him.